This woman's a loon. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas took the debate. Watch this.
Google Maps now show Gulf of America instead of Gulf of Mexico for app users in the United States, which is a complete farce because it's the Gulf of Mexico. It always has been. And we know that the AP got kicked out yesterday because they refused to buy into this lie, because that's all y'all really want to promote is lies. So I will end by saying this, Mr. Chairman, because I know we believe in Jesus in this chamber. In John 8:32, it says, the truth shall set you free. So maybe we should focus on a little bit of truth in this chamber.
Cool. How was President Biden's health for the last year of his presidency? Love to talk about it. Let's chat. I love truth too. Let's do it. Vice President J.D. Vance responded to an X post about the matter of free speech from former MSNBC anchor Mehdi Hasan, who's very upset about the AP issue. So Vice President Vance responded to this Mehdi Hasan attack on the poor AP by saying, yes, dummy, I think there's a difference between not giving a reporter a seat in the White House press briefing room, which is actually, that's not even what Trump did. Trump did less than that, and jailing people for dissenting views. The latter's a threat to free speech. The former is not. Hope that helps. Joining me now, the hosts of the America This Week podcast, author and novelist Walter Kirn, and our friend Racket News editor Matt Taibbi. Matt was in that hearing during Congresswoman Crockett's weird rant. Guys, great to see you. Matt, welcome back. Walter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for having us, Megyn.
So I'm sorry that you had thoughts and prayers, because that must have been rather unpleasant, Matt. What did you make of it?
Oh, that was bizarre. She was looking, Congresswoman Crockett was looking right at me the entire time, talking about how we want to lie on the world and all this other stuff, and she was really animated. I could not, I made the mistake of trying to follow what she was saying, which is confusing.
Silly.
Yeah, it was very strange. The whole hearing was bizarre. Really, I was only asked one question, really, by a Democrat the entire hearing, which went on for hours. So
what was the point of the hearing? Why were you there, and what was the point?
I think Jim Jordan really wanted to underscore that there are continuing issues with the censorship landscape, which coincidentally Vice President Vance talked about this week, a lot of it having to do with the integration of the United States with sort of foreign and especially European-driven censorship regimes like the Digital Services Act or the Online Safety Act or Germany's NetzDG Act. And the United States is still basically in conflict with a lot of those countries and suppressing a lot of forces within our own country that want those kinds of measures here in the U.S.
All right, so the Democrats now see an opportunity, Walter, to spin this whole thing because the Trump administration says the AP can still go to the White House press briefing room, but can't have the extra bonus of going into the Oval, which is an extraordinary event anyway, by the way. I mean, like, when did Joe Biden just randomly invite a bunch of reporters just on a moment's notice to come visit him in the Oval and chit-chat with them? They can't go on Air Force One, but many other media companies can, not the AP. But they think that they're the vaunted gold standard of journalism. So they're very, very upset. And many on the left are now trying to organize this sort of posse by journalists like, yeah, I stand with the AP. This is bullshit. What do you make of it?
Well, the next time Delta Airlines refuses to upgrade me to a seat in the front of the plane, I'm going to cry censorship. Riding in the back of the plane is not being censored. Strangely enough, Matt and I, when we applied for credentials to the Democratic Convention, weren't allowed to go in at all. So they protest too much. The fact is that censorship has to do with your ability to say things, not the place from which you listen to things.
Well said. But they don't understand that. And what's really happening here is the AP has its feelings hurt. It's upset that it's not the vaunted news organization it once was, the same way 60 Minutes is not the vaunted news organization it once was. And the theme of today's show, for that, They have only themselves to blame. This whole show is about personal responsibility. But the AP has allowed itself to be turned into a joke. Go ahead, Walter.
Where does AP think the names of bodies of water come from? God? They're political designations. You know, a lot of these places in America have had three names. They had a name when we first got here. The American Indians named it something. Then the next group of settlers named it something else. And then when the place became a state, it was named something else. It is government that gives names to large features of geography. If the AP wants to dispute that and has some other policy about names and where they come from, that's fine. But the fact is they decided to have a tantrum, and they got a tantrum back, and now they're crying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, didn't we change the name of Fort Bragg because people decided that was offensive? All these high schools out in San Francisco had their names changed when we decided that the founding fathers they were named after might have had a slave. Even here in New York, closer to where I live, Matt, I got to go across the damn Mario Cuomo bridge now instead of the Tappan Zee, which is what it will always be to me because of that loser, Andrew Cuomo. But the AP will decide whether Trump's a lunatic and his names stick or he's not and they don't, whatever. And if it has to suffer any blowback, it cloaks itself in the First Amendment and it's the victim.
There's an angle here that's kind of funny. I think the AP doesn't understand that to a certain extent, Trump is trolling exactly them. The AP style book is essentially the glossary of accepted terminology that the entire print journalism industry uses. And when I first started off in print journalism, the style book was fairly static. It would change every now and then. But recently, it's become this thing where there are changes constantly, where they advise you, try to avoid using the word woke if you can, because it's used in a derogatory fashion by conservatives. Don't refer to the sex at birth of a transgender person if you can avoid doing that. They're constantly instructing you on usages that go far beyond things like grammar or official names. And Trump, by naming the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, I don't know how I feel about that personally, but it's incredibly clear that he's sort of returning in kind, that kind of stuff. And for them to throw a fit over this, it's silly on two levels. Number one, I came up in independent journalism. Nobody ever gave me a credential. You don't need a credential to be a journalist. You can do it, as you say, Megyn, from where you are, or we're supposed to be on the outside. The tantrum is ridiculous. But the second thing is they do this constantly. That's what they do, and they're being called out on it.
They can't stand it, and they also can't stand having special access to power. You guys know as well as I do that when it's a Democratic administration, they get all the leaks, they get invited to the right cocktail parties, they feel like one of the cool kids, and now they're on the outs. Now they've been relegated to the nerd section where no one will swing by and say hello to them. Now, I think Matt and I feel the same. Walter, I assume you do too. As a journalist, it's better to be ostracized. It's better not to be too chummy. It's one of the reasons why, even though I totally support President Trump, I don't ask him for any favors at all. It's very important that I not owe him anything. I can't owe him anything because I have to be able to do the show in a way that leaves me free to criticize him or his administration. But people who work at CBS and ABC and the Washington Post, they're dying to stay on the inner halls of relevance. It's one of the reasons why the 51 intelligence agents having their access codes pulled for all the intelligence buildings was so effective, right? You're out. You're no longer important, Walter. And that kind of thing kills them.
Well, I live in Montana, about as far away from the White House briefing room as you can be. But as a younger journalist, when I first went to Washington, just after Bill Clinton was elected the first time, I did a story on the New Republic magazine, which was a very inside publication, very popular with the Democratic establishment at the time. And I hung around their offices for a few days. And everybody of note, cabinet people, top advisors of the president, came through and gave off-the-record briefings. And as I sat sat there like a fly on the wall, I realized that the journalists were married to the press secretaries of the people in the administration. Everybody's kids went to school together. They gathered that night at parties and bars. They were, in fact, one social group, a very tight-knit social group. And I completely agree with you that proximity can become a form of corruption, because as a journalist, when you're socializing with people, you're constantly hearing things that you can't report. And after a while, you're living in a world where you know way more than you are allowed to tell your audience. And that makes you part of them. In other words, you're keeping their secrets. You're keeping their secrets more than you're telling their secrets. And your job is to tell their secrets.
That's so true. That's why it's like, it's dangerous to need access in that way. It's a privilege and it's a power to be removed. You know what I mean? Like, it's better not to be at all their parties and rubbing elbows with all of them. And that applies to journalists and it applies to Supreme Court justices. You know, it's like, I think about it a lot because now I know this president better than I've known any other president. I saw him at the Super Bowl. We have a nice relationship now. We glad-handed. It was great to see him. I'm definitely rooting for him. I've told the audience that. But it does not cross over. I did not go to Mar-a-Lago on election night. You've got to keep somewhat of an arm's length or you become beholden to them. And you can't let your I'm rooting for him to succeed overcome your I'm rooting for myself to tell the truth to the audience, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I was advised as a young reporter by, some people who are kind of legendary investigative reporters at the time. Look, if you want friends, you can't stay in this business. This is a business where you're going to lose friends, and if you try to keep them, you're probably not doing your job correctly. So get used to having a pretty narrow social life, and then you'll be fine. And I think, what Walter's talking about, I mean, a lot of people in Washington talk about this concept of the blob, which is everybody you meet is married to somebody else who's a lobbyist. And there are these interlocking relationships where every transaction that you see, whether it's a piece of legislation that gets passed or, an executive order, there's a whole bunch of hidden connections that the public doesn't get to see, which is, it's questionable. I think it needs to be reported on, but it's worse when the reporters are part of the equation.
We continue to face uncertainty when it comes to the economy, with a perfect storm brewing as Social Security and Medicare hit a breaking point, as the largest generation is hitting retirement. A smaller workforce means a smaller tax base. You pair that with our growing national debt and rising cost of living, and we could have a big problem. So what are you doing now to protect your family for the future? Gold can be a safe haven in hard economic times, and Birch Gold makes it easy to diversify a portion of your savings into physical gold. Birch Gold will help you transition an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and it does not cost you 1 cent out of pocket. Protect your future today. Text MK to 989898, get your free info kit on gold, and get a copy of the Ultimate Guide for Gold in the Trump Era, with a foreword by Donald Trump Jr. There's no obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned the trust of countless Americans looking to safeguard their savings. Just text my initials MK to the number 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.